Hello, it's Bible Scribe. Thank you for joining me once again. Today I wanted to go ahead and continue our reading. We've been reading together on our live streams in Mark, the book of Mark and the Gospels. And we're just not going fast enough for my taste. So what I'd like to do is when I do have time, I will make a video of the reading continuing during the week, so that just as I am probably anxious to see what happens next in the book of Mark, you probably are too. So I wanted to make sure that we don't always wait till Sunday mornings to continue that reading. So I will be posting some of these reading videos during the week as well. So let's look at Mark. And last time we were in Mark chapter 4. And in Mark chapter 4, Jesus had been by the seaside, by the Sea of Galilee. And he had a great multitude of people gathered to him. So many he was in the boat teaching them at the seashore. And he gave them some information about the kingdom of God, but he gave it in parable form. And so many people didn't understand it. He gave the parable of the seed being sown on the side of a path. He afterwards tells the disciples exactly what that parable means, and says that it's told this way so that people will not understand, but unto you, the disciples, it was given to know the mysteries of the kingdom of God. But to those that are without, they are parables only. He goes ahead and gives the disciples a detailed description of that parable of the sower and the seed, so that they would understand it, and then hopefully continue to understand as he spoke in parables later on. He also talks about the mustard seed, saying the kingdom of God is like that it is small but will grow and be very large in the end. And then the chapter ends with him and the disciples in the boat on the Sea of Galilee, and the storm comes, and the disciples are afraid. He chastises them for their lack of faith, and then he calms the storm on the sea. And so that's where we ended chapter 4, on the Sea of Galilee. So here in chapter 5, let's just start reading in verse 1. And I'll make this a little bigger so you can see it. And they came to the other side of the sea in the country of Gadarenes. Now, just so you're aware, I wanted to show you, as I have been doing, geographically where we are talking about. So this is the Sea of Galilee. But what you'll note here is, even on a modern map, and I don't know if you can see it now, it's pretty small, but if we scroll down here to the east, southeast, there's a place called, in modern tongue, it's called Hamat Gadara. Now this is actually the region of the Gadarenes. So as they had been near Capernaum, on the northern side, northwestern side of the Sea of Galilee, they had now traveled across and were in the region of the Gadarenes. So if this is the region of the Gadarenes, they had been in Capernaum and they were going across the sea. They had, in chapter 4, had their encounter with the storm in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, and then continued on to their destination near the Gadarenes. I have also seen in some maps and accounts that the Gadarenes also included even just the entire eastern seaboard of the Sea of Galilee. So it could have been in any of this area, but this place that's even in the modern times called Gadara is probably a likely position here in the southeast of the Sea of Galilee. So this is the locations that we're talking about in chapter 5. So in verse 1, he had said they came to the other side of the sea into the country of the Gadarenes. And when he had come out of the ship, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no man could bind him, no, not with chains, because that he had often been bound with fetters and chains, and the chains had been plucked asunder by him, and the fetters broke in pieces, neither could any man tame him. Always, day and night, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying and cutting himself with stones. But when he saw Jesus afar off, he ran and worshipped him, and cried with a loud voice and said, "What have I to do with you, Jesus, the Son of the Most High God? I adjure thee by God that thou torment me not." Now recognize in this case that the demon or demons immediately recognized Jesus Christ as the Son of God, the Son of the Most High God. Now this is interesting because, as both the Bible hints at and other writings speak openly about, Satan did not understand that Jesus was actually the Son of God when he tempted him in the wilderness, which would of course been before this time. And of course that sort of makes sense because Satan would have tempted Christ before he had done his miracles. So it's interesting when you realize the miracles were done by Christ specifically to verify his authority. And that didn't happen until after the wilderness temptation. So that's interesting points all around. But these demons recognize Christ right away and say he's the Son of God, the Most High God. They say, I adjure thee by God that thou torment me not. Verse 8, for he said unto him, come out of the man, thou unclean spirit. And he asked him, what is thy name? And he answered, saying, my name is Legion, for we are many. So this is apparently a legion or a number of demons inside this man. And he besought him much that he would not send them away out of the country. Now there was there nigh unto the mountains a great herd of swine feeding. And all the devils besought him, saying, send us into the swine, that we may enter into them. And forthwith Jesus gave them leave. And the unclean spirits went out and entered into the swine, and the herd ran violently down a steep place into the sea. They were about 2,000, and were choked in the sea. And they that fed the swine fled, meaning the caretakers of the swine. So these would have been the swine herders or farmers, if you will. So those that looked after the swine fled and told it in the city and in the country. And they went out, meaning all the people of the surrounding areas went out to see what it was that had been done. And they came, all these people, crowds of people came to Jesus, and see him that was possessed with the devil, and had the legion sitting and clothed and in his right mind. And these people were all afraid because of what they saw. Verse 16, and they that saw it told them how it befell him that was possessed with the devil, and also concerning the swine. And they began to pray him to depart out of their coasts. So even though Christ had cast out this legion of demons from this man and essentially saved him, these people saw it, heard the story, and were frightened. You do wonder why that is. It could have been that perhaps because they saw Jesus speaking with the legion, with the demons, perhaps that was scary. I don't exactly understand that. But nevertheless, it all disturbed these people. And probably also because the livelihood of these caretakers of the swine had been destroyed because of what Christ allowed the demons to go into them and then kill all the swine. So they were probably pretty upset. And probably their story wasn't as accurate as it could have been because they were angry. At least that's what I would guess, since their livelihood was kind of messed up. So maybe all of that added into that these people were upset with Christ and they wanted him to leave their region where he had just come into. So in verse 18, it says, when Christ had come into the ship again, he that had been possessed with the devil prayed him that he might be with him. So the man that had the demon in him and that he had saved asked that he could go with Christ on the boat with the disciples. And in verse 19, it says, Jesus suffered him not. He didn't allow him to come with him, but said unto him, go home to your friends and tell them how great things the Lord has done for you and has had compassion on you. And the man departed and began to publish in Decapolis how great things Jesus had done for him, and all men did marvel. Now, if we go back to our map, just because I'm curious where Decapolis is, Doing some research online, I found that Decapolis is still further southeast of Gadarenes. So if, as we had said, they had crossed the sea to go to the Gadarenes area, it seems to me, based on modern geography and the location of different cities, that the city of Irbid is the ancient location of Decapolis. It was one of the larger cities of the time period and is still one of the larger cities in this area of the world. So my guess is that once this guy was saved, and he had asked at the shoreline, he had asked to go in the boat with Christ. But Christ said no. The man traveled back down to the larger city, to Decapolis, and started telling everybody what Christ said to him to tell, that the Lord had healed him from this demonic possession. Now in verse 21, we'll continue reading. When Jesus then passed over again by ship to the other side, so now we're again talking about the other side of the Sea of Galilee. So he probably started over here near the Gadarenes, and again over to the other side, perhaps near Capernaum again, but on the other side of the sea. It says in verse 21 that much people gathered to him again, and he was nigh unto the sea. Again, kind of backed up against the sea shoreline, because so many people were following him, were coming after him. Verse 22, behold, there came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet, and besought him greatly, saying, my little daughter lies at the point of death. I pray you, come and lay thy hands on her, that she may be healed, and she shall live. And Jesus went with him, and much people followed him and thronged him. So there were a lot of people. This word thronged means just on every side. He was pressed close together with all these people. They were all over the place. Verse 25, and a certain woman, and so this is on the way to Jairus' house to heal his daughter. This happens on the way as all these people are pressing in on him. A certain woman which had an issue of blood 12 years, and had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse, when she heard of Jesus, came in the press behind him, and touched his garment. So among all these people pushing in on Christ, she squeezes between enough of them to get up close enough to touch Jesus in the back, essentially, touches his back. In verse 28, she said, if I may just touch his clothes, I shall be whole. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him about in the press, and said, who touched my clothes? And the disciples said unto him, thou seest the multitude thronging thee, and you say, who touched me? They were being incredulous, a little sassy, saying, how can you even ask that? There's so many people around. In verse 32, and Jesus looked around to see her that had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what was done in her, came and fell down before him and told him all the truth. So that's interesting. Jesus didn't even necessarily call her out in any way, but she saw him looking for her, and she was so afraid that she came to him and told him what she had done. And he said to her, daughter, thy faith has made you whole. Go in peace, be whole of thy plague. So this story of the woman, it intrigues me, and it's interesting to me. I looked earlier before I started this video. I looked this up and found that this account is in the other Gospels, not John, but it's in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And I wanted to look it up just to see if that was the case, because I wanted to see how important this story was of this woman that just kind of squeezes through the crowd and touches Christ and is healed, how important that was to the writers of the New Testament. So that's interesting. It was obviously very important to them. And as I was thinking about this small little account of this woman, it's just a few verses. What is it? From verse 25 down to verse 34. So it's just 9 or 10 verses. But it's interesting. So think about what happens in this story. A woman. Now, we can only assume that she is a Jewish woman because she's in a Jewish town. All the people that are around Jesus are Jewish. His disciples are Jewish. They are all from the tribe of Judah or from the Israelites. So these are all Jews. And she comes with an issue of blood. So blood is very significant, by the way, to the Jewish people. And she, by the way, would have been seen as unclean because of this issue of blood. Of course, if anyone had known about it, right? So it's not something that necessarily she would have been recognized for. But just to be aware that in the Levitical law, an issue of blood makes a woman unclean. And she had tried many things. It says she had gone to many different physicians and allowed them to do different things. She had spent all the money she had on different remedies for this problem, and nothing made it better. In fact, it had gotten worse over the years. And so to me, as I was thinking about this whole thing about blood and the issue and the uncleanness, and that she was a Jewish woman, then I, of course, went back to the very beginning of the story, which says she had had this issue of blood for 12 years. And I almost fell out of my seat when I realized, wow, that's really significant. So if you put all these things together, you almost have a picture of the Jewish nation, an allegorical picture of the Jewish nation, which had been, of course, had always struggled to stay pure before God. It was not pure. It had gone into idolatry, and they had gone into Babylon, and they had done all these different things. And so they may have, in a sense, tried many different remedies for their problem, but the remedy always was God. And so in the same sense, this woman had tried all these remedies. Nothing stopped the issue of blood that was coming from her. And that she had spent all she had. And then who is finally the one that can stop the issue of blood and can make someone whole again and cleanse the uncleanness from your life, from the Jewish people's lives, because she was a Jew. And the 12 years she had spent represented the Jewish people. Well, the only one that could do that was the Master, the Redeemer that God had sent, the Son of the Most High God, as it was said in this passage. And so when you kind of put all those things together and think really hard about it, this seems like a very significant little thing to have happened. Now, some people might say, well, that would make you think this story isn't true, that it was just added by the writers to make a point about the Jewish nation. But no, the more I've studied the Bible and the different things that not only Christ did, but some other people in the Bible, it just seems that throughout history, God was always painting the picture of what he was doing. It's not refulfilled prophecy. It's not just random symbology. Everything God did had a purpose. And I see that in this just 9 verses of this story about this woman that had the issue of blood for 12 years, 12 tribes. She was a Jew. She went to Christ. She had gone to all these other physicians, tried all these different things, just as the Jews had tried all these different things. Idolatry. They tried to follow the law. They couldn't. They went to Babylon. They still were messed up and broken. They had come back into their land and they were still messed up and broken. What was the only thing? Who was the only one that could stop the problems with Israel, and the only one that could stop the problems that this woman had? It was Jesus Christ, the Redeemer, that God sent to them to fix all of their problems. And so all they had to do was exactly what she did, is reach out in faith and just touch him in the back. Just reach out and touch him in faith. And there were so few of the Jews that did that. So few. It's very profound when you put all those pieces together. Well, let's go forward then and keep talking about Jairus and his daughter, because that's where all this has happened, in the middle of this. Jesus and the people traveling to see Jairus' daughter so he could heal her. So in verse 35, it says, while he yet spake to this woman, there came from the ruler of the synagogue's house certain which said, thy daughter is dead. Why troublest thou the master any further? As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said unto the ruler of the synagogue, be not afraid, only believe. And he suffered no man to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. So only Jesus, Peter, James, and John went in to see Jairus' daughter. It was not allowed for everyone to see this healing occur. Verse 38, and he cometh to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and sees the tumult, and them that wept and wailed greatly. So of course the daughter had just died, and so the whole family was there weeping and wailing, probably tearing their clothes as was customary, and preparing for the grieving process and all of that. In verse 39, when he was come in, he said to them, why make ye this ado and weep? The damsel is not dead, but sleeps. And they laughed at him, they scorned him. But when he had put them all out, he takes the father and the mother of the damsel and them that were with him, and enters where the damsel was lying. So the picture here is that he comes in and tells all the people that are sitting around crying and wailing that they shouldn't be doing that because she is only asleep. She is not dead. And they laughed at him, they made fun of him, but he put them all out. He said, you all leave, except for the father and the mother, so Jairus and his wife, and the disciples that were with Christ, Peter, James, and John. So that's all that are in there. So that makes Jesus, Peter, James, John, and Jairus and his wife, and the girl who is, according to Christ, just sleeping. That's 7 people. It's a very interesting number again. In verse 41, he took the damsel by the hand and said unto her, Talitha cumi, which is, being interpreted, damsel, I say to you, arise. And straightway the damsel arose, and she walked. For she was the age of 12 years old. Again, another interesting number, 12 years. And they were astonished with great astonishment. And he charged them straitly that no man should know it, and commanded that something should be given to her to eat. And I just have to say that right now I'm realizing what this story means. You know, earlier as I prepared to do this video, I saw what was in the story about the woman with the issue of blood, but this is just as significant. Do you realize what we just read? And it just dawned on me. So I'll kind of talk through this. But what you see is, you see 7 people in the room. 7 people. 7 is, of course, related to the ages of the earth. 7,000 years of history. Now, the way it's talked about in prophecy was that Christ or God would take 7,000 years to cleanse humanity. Okay? And through whatever means that is. So that includes everything that's happened in history down through the ages. But in the end, he would get to the remnant of humanity that was his children, okay? And separate them from the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, the sheep from the goats. So it would take in prophecy 7,000 years for that to occur, all of human history. Now, what does Christ do? He comes in, he raises the damsel, the young girl. He raises the young girl who is what? She's 12 years old. That's a reference back to Israel, okay, the Jews. And so at the end of history, and according to prophecy, this is what Christ says is going to happen as well, that Israel, having been saved by the Redeemer through the promise, the promised Redeemer, the Messiah, all the covenants surrounding that with the Jewish people, the remnant of the Israelites would be saved and risen, okay, resurrected. And then what does it say in the last verse, which is also important? It says that he charged them that no man should know it, and then commanded them that something should be given to her to eat. Another thing that's in all the prophecies about when Israel would be taken to heaven was that they would feast with God. They would feast with God. Some of the texts talk about them feasting on the bodies of Behemoth and or Leviathan, or maybe both. But that's in the prophecies as well. So when you look again at this little section, now we're talking about verses 5:35 through 5:43. So verses 35 to 43, just this little section, 8 verses or so. You have 7 people representing all of history. You have Christ, the Redeemer, raising a girl from the dead who's 12 years old. That's Christ resurrecting Israel, the remnant of Israel, and then feeding her, getting her something to eat, which is the feast in heaven with God at his table. So again, I'm just, I'm shocked that just dawned on me as we're reading through this. But I think in both these cases of the woman with the issue of blood and the raising of Jairus' daughter, we have very specific references and pictures of what God is doing in history. And it seems that the more I read the Bible, the more those things are just popping out alive for me. And I hope you see it too. Well, that is all of Mark chapter 5. I hope you've enjoyed it. Next time, if it's at the live stream or if it's on a video separate, we will do Mark chapter 6. So thank you for joining me, and God bless you in your research. Take care.